there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video discussing the Sacramento Kings as we go through an offseason preview following their loss in the first round to the Golden State Warriors. As you can tell, I've got my Kings gear on. Very excited for this video, and I'm sure you Kings fans are as well. Some of the most passionate, dedicated fans in the universe. And this video was pretty requested on the channel following the loss to the Golden State Warriors. So huge props to you guys as fans, not only filling up the Golden One Center, which at some point is going to be my goal to make sure I go to a game there in person, preferably a playoff game in the near future. My guess is next season will be a year that you guys are probably back in the postseason, and I'm hoping you go even further. So if you guys are new to Utility Sports and you do enjoy this video, you find the information in here accurate, I would really ask you guys to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and then also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. It lets me know I'm doing a good job here. I can see how many of you view from notifications, and it just gives me a good idea on if you guys are enjoying the content or not. Again, this video was pretty requested, so if there's another team that you'd like to see me cover in an offseason preview like this style of video, let me know down in the comments section below, and I'll get to them ASAP. So for a video preview, we're going to get to that in a second, but I just want to first mention that there's an off-season preview playlist now as well. This was also something requested on the channel, and as you can tell, I momentarily have changed our logo to a more Sacramento Kings style purple, away from our typical teal blue, at least for this video, just so you guys can get a little bit of hype for the Kings following a fantastic season, which is what we're now going to jump into here with our video preview. We're going to talk about where this team just finished off, because before you can talk about where they should go or what direction they're heading, you have to know where you're currently picking them up from. And it's just like going and picking somebody up from a store or something. You have to know where the person is before you can get them to where they need to be. And that's really important when we look at these teams for a video preview and just an offseason preview in general. And then the 2023 NBA draft. We're going to look at their current draft situation, some potential targets they could look to add to this roster. Of course, last year they did pretty well in the draft, and I think this year they could be well positioned to find another decent player that could help contribute to them. Then the 2023 NBA free agency. We'll look at guys that are pending free agents that could potentially leave Sacramento. I think a lot of Kings players would like to stay in Sac and really continue to build what this team is. But the Kings do have some flexibility here depending on what happens with some of those guys. So it's important to talk about not only who they could lose, but also who they could look to bring in. I think there's one hot name on the market that Monte McNair has history with a little bit that he would really love to add to this roster. We'll also discuss some trade targets on who I think this team could go look to add. You might be saying, interesting, trade targets. You haven't talked about that as much in some of the other video or offseason previews so far, some of the other videos. Why are you interested in doing so now for this Kings team? And it's because they have a different situation, different outlook that I think could be expedited potentially by a trade with a pretty clear list of targets that make sense for them. And then we'll get into that early outlook for next season, what I expect from this team, how I see them potentially taking steps forward and improving this roster going into next season, and then thus beyond. So let's jump into that season recap. And what a year it was. 48-34, a massive turnaround from a team that the year before went 30-52. They won 30 games one year, and then the very next year they come back and nearly win 50 games and had the end of the season not played out so kind of meh for them in the regular season. Had they maybe tried a little bit harder, pushed for that 50 win mark, they probably could have gotten there. So very, very impressive year for them. And honestly, Mike Brown deserves all the credit. I'm going to be 100% transparent with you guys. I didn't think Mike Brown was a phenomenal hire when they hired him. And boy, was I wrong. I have no problem admitting that, because I just thought that, with his previous head coaching experience, there was nothing from what I had ever seen from him that I was super enthused by. And I thought they needed someone who was young and kind of creative and had some different stuff going on than what I thought Mike Brown was going to bring. Well, looks like his time in Golden State really did serve him well, because he looked like a completely different coach this year for Sacramento than what he previously was. At first, he was known as a defensive coach, and Sacramento was the most prolific offense in the league this year. And defensively, they weren't great throughout the regular season, which is kind of the exact opposite of what you would have expected from a Mike Brown team before the season started. So it was really interesting to me seeing kind of the polarity of this team and how different they were than I was expecting, even under Mike Brown, who I had a pretty good idea of what he was likely going to bring. And obviously in the postseason, we saw against the Warriors, forcing that to 7 games, they had defensive strategies that worked and were very, very solid. And Mike Brown's defensive affluence definitely did play a part in that, but it was just a crazy fun season, and their pace, their style of play was so enjoyable. And I think it was all headlined by De'Aaron Fox, the NBA's clutch player of the year, deservedly so, with 3 game winners this year, and just fourth quarter basket after fourth quarter basket. He was the most prolific fourth quarter scorer in the NBA. Honestly, if he had not gotten the award, it would have been a total robbery. So Mike Brown, coach of the year unanimously. De'Aaron Fox, clutch player of the year, should have been unanimous. Those 2 guys just fantastic in spearheading this Kings season. That was so fun, so phenomenal, and honestly, just an awesome mark for a team that really needed it. Kings fans, you should not have any disappointment at all in your heart pushing not only the Warriors to 7 games, but also just where the expectations were on this team to where they actually ended up. It was a fantastic and honestly unbelievable season. Domantas Sabonis had an all-NBA type season as well. I think he'll end up being awarded all-NBA third-team center. Now, I'm going to keep it a buck here. His postseason run was not great. Of course, there was some incidents as well with Draymond Green. I'm sure Draymond's probably not welcome in Sacramento right now, because I'm sure Kings fans would probably storm him, honestly, because I know how passionate you guys are. And obviously, Draymond was not making any friends in this series, but Sabonis was great all year long. And I think there are some clear areas that he needs to get better at and just improve and then become more comfortable with. He's got to find a way to attack to his right hand and finish with his right hand more consistently. I think, we've seen that problem in the past from him in his limited playoff appearances with Indiana, but there was never like this expectation of, oh, he's supposed to be this like all NBA level player. And this year it really got highlighted because of how good of a regular season he had. He's been an all-star before, but being an all NBA level player, such a different magnitude. And I think there was more attention on him because of that, just also with how much attention was drawn to this Warriors-Kings series because it was so dynamic, so dynamite, that there was a lot of attention, obviously. I watched all 7 games and they were all fantastic, and I'm sad the series is over just because I would have loved this series to, be best out of 49 or something crazy like that, where we just have all of these awesome games back to back to back. But Sabonis, I think there's some clear points. I think he has to be more aggressive as a scorer, specifically shooting some of those mid-range jump shots that the Warriors were willing to give him. He did it at points, but I still think Sabonis is a good player. Obviously, the Halliburton trade, there was a lot of negative thoughts about that, and it might still be fair to say that you would prefer having Halliburton over Sabonis as an individual player. But I think for Sacramento, it's pretty clear that this was a move that they ended up feeling like they needed to make. And to be honest, they're pretty justified in that decision so far. Keegan Murray, what a rookie year for him. Broke the NBA rookie record for three-pointers made in a season, and was very, very prolific from behind the three-point line. About 67% of his points he scored this year were from behind the three-point line. So if you're looking for a clear line of progression for him, it's pretty obvious that it's scoring inside the arc, and I think he's got the skill set to do it. In fact, he did it quite a bit for Iowa on a lot of duck-ins into the post area, cutting, playing without the ball, some of the things he already does well. I think that just putting himself in more of those positions throughout the offseason, and then hopefully, to be honest, even though he doesn't need to, I wouldn't suggest that he should even really play the Summer League, I think that it wouldn't be a bad thing for him either, because I think if you gave him the opportunities to just be, hey, for like a 7-8 game stretch, you just go create all of our offense. And it's kind of like a live game. It's a little bit different, obviously. Summer League's kind of a mess, but still, it's an opportunity for him to be the guy, which is what he did in the Summer League last year. Let's give him some more reps of that, see if he can get back-to-back Summer League MVPs, and just keep giving him the rock and let him do his thing, because I think that's really the next area of growth for him, is being a little bit more competent on the ball on offense, which is something I think he's going to grow into quite well. Malik Monk had a fantastic season for himself. The Lakers are probably pretty sad that they weren't able to keep him just based on the way that they had structured his contract the year prior. Him signing in Sacramento was phenomenal, and honestly one of the most underrated signings from last offseason, a signing that completely changed the complexion of this Kings team because it added a seriously elite bench scorer, one of the best bench scorers in the league this year, and a guy that won them not only regular season games, but honestly won them playoff games as well. There's games where they don't beat the Warriors in maybe game 1 or 2 without Malik Monk's contributions, and I think throughout the duration of that series, he was a consistent go-to guy for them, and one that I just thought early in the series, I wasn't sure how the Warriors were going to try and match up with him. And to be honest, I don't think they ever really found a good matchup. It's just sometimes the Warriors were able to score more points because they had Steph Curry on the other side. But Malik Monk was a problem causer throughout the entire duration of the series. And then I think the final note here about this season that I want to really spend some time on before we jump forward into this offseason is the other contributors. And there's a long list of guys here. I'm not going to mention everyone on the roster, but I think this is a mark of a good coach and what Mike Brown was able to do this year. He put a lot of players in situations to succeed. Trey Lyles, a guy that was not ready to be expecting big things from this season. And well, he proved me wrong. He was awesome for a good amount of the year for the Sacramento Kings. Not like he's going to, play himself into a $20 million a year contract or anything like that. But I mean, just his ability to stretch the floor. There's games against, you think about games against the Minnesota Timberwolves earlier this year where, at times Rudy Gobert was kind of dominating Sabonis in that. And then Mike Brown just says, oh, we'll just put Lyles out there and he'll stretch him out and he'll hit 2 corner threes in a row. And all of a sudden the Wolves have a huge problem to figure out. And it's just a really good coaching. Davion Mitchell had such a fantastic playoff series, in my opinion. The fact that he only played 8 minutes in the final game is one of my big question marks about that series. And I wasn't really sure as to why. I know that there's some offensive limitations with Mitchell. I think that's something that Mike Brown maybe has to think about over the offseason and kind of address. And like Davion Mitchell should have been on the floor, in my opinion, because of how he was playing against Steph. And it's not a surprise to me that the game that he played only 8 minutes, Steph went off for 50 points. It's not that I should expect Steph to score 50, but out of all the games, the one that he plays only 8 minutes, it kind of makes some sense because Davion is a dog. Absolutely hounded Steph throughout the series. And yes, Steph had an all-world type series, but did we see what it looked like with Terrence Davis guarding him today? Just not nearly the same impact. But there's also moments this year where guys like Harrison Barnes stepped up big. Obviously, he's a key contributor for this team as well, so I don't want to overlook Harrison Barnes. There's just a lot of good players that contributed this season for Sacramento, so I really want to shout them out and get some hype in here for the Sacramento Kings. And let's get one more hashtag light the beam. Throw that down in the comment section below. Hashtag light the beam. What a great season it was. And also Kevin Huerter, I don't want to overlook Huerter as well. Shot 40% from 3, really nice pickup for them. I still don't love the amount of flexibility that they've limited themselves to based on that trade, which was my main issue with it last year. But Huerter was a nice piece for them this season. So let's go ahead forward into the 2023 NBA draft. They own pick number 24 in this year's draft, and I think that they could potentially consider a trade to add a veteran with that selection. Like I said earlier, they'll have to make some other moves to open up some other trade flexibility after the Kevin Huerter deal last year. But they do have their own picks for the most part at their disposal. The only way that they could trade pick 24, though, is after technically selecting a player on draft night and then therefore trading the draft rights to said teams. So an example of this would be like when the Hawks traded Luka Doncic to the Dallas Mavericks. The Hawks technically selected and drafted Luka. That's why there's pictures of him in a Hawks draft cap. But then they ultimately traded that pick, or not the pick, but the draft rights to Luka to the Dallas Mavericks is the best example to look at it as what I kind of mean by that. So who are some targets if they were to keep pick 24? And one of these players, you might say, whoa, we already have that guy. Not technically you don't, but he's very, very familiar. That's the identical twin brother of Keegan Murray, Kris Murray, who also played at Iowa at the same time as Keegan Murray, but decided to stick around for another year. And it was really, really good for him. He's really helped his draft stock and really showcased an improvement in his game. Kind of funny, but he's going to play very similarly to Keegan Murray. And then Kings fans might say, well, we don't need another Keegan Murray. Yeah, but why not have one, right? Kris Murray shot the ball very, very well this year. Now, the fun thing is he is left-handed, so you'll always be able to tell who's who on the court because one guy will be doing stuff with their left hand, one will be doing stuff with their right hand, which is always one of the main issues. Last year when I was scouting Keegan Murray, I just swear I'd be watching Iowa games and I'd be like, oh my gosh, which number was Keegan again? Because I just always have to stay super focused and locked in on who Keegan was. I've been scouting Kris Murray for a few years now, so I like his game. I think he's going to adjust very well to the NBA. I think pick 24 is kind of a stretch. He probably doesn't fall that far. But if he does, he's like the automatic number one pick, in my opinion, for Sacramento. Afterward, though, Rayan Rupert from the NBL could be a nice option. Offensively, rather raw, but defensively gives you some of the things that I think the Kings were looking for this past trade deadline. Say a guy like Matisse Thybulle, I think Rupert could maybe play into that level. Jett Howard from Michigan, more of an offensive type player. Who has a skill set to get downhill and attack. I think he fits kind of the pace and space style Sacramento was playing around Sabonis. I think Howard would be a really nice addition. Shot very well on catch and shoot threes this past year for Michigan as well. Bryce Sensabaugh, kind of a more slow it down in the half court player offensively, which I don't think necessarily fits Sacramento, but the talent is there. And as a freshman, I mean, you can always try and get a guy to buy in. Just because we didn't see him do it a ton in college doesn't mean he's not going to be able to adjust to that at the NBA level. Now, I think Howard probably fits in quicker, but again, these are rookies, so there's going to be a likelihood that most of them spend some time for the G League affiliate, the Stockton Kings, instead of the Sacramento Kings to start their careers anyway. So are you worried about immediate fit and initial fit, or are you more so concerned about long-term impact? Because it's very likely Sensabaugh could just end up being a better player than Jett Howard. Brandon Podziemski would be a really nice addition to Sacramento. At times this series, it felt like if Fox or Monk weren't hitting shots, the team just didn't have perimeter scoring at the level that they needed it, specifically perimeter shooting. I know Herter throughout the year was so fantastic, but it is notable that in the playoffs, he just did not make the same percentage of his shots. It's, again, a 7-game sample size, so I don't want to base everything off of that. But also when Herter goes to the bench, what's the three-point shooting looking like? And for me, it was a little spotty. I think that adding a guy like a Brandon Podziemski could make some sense, although it shouldn't be the top priority. But if he's your best available player at your pick and you don't really have another guy that you think's a clear option, then that's when you pull the trigger on it. Even though I think Podziemski is a really good player, I just don't know if he's necessarily the Kings' number one need at this point. Julian Strawther, just a calm, cool, collected player out of Gonzaga, had a 40-point game this year for them, was pretty much a very reliable wing, which is what you come to expect from a Gonzaga player to begin with. And he's just found like a nice steady role and consistency to his game that I think Sacramento would like to have as a wing option. Trayce Jackson-Davis, Noah Clowney, these are kind of more like long-term, hey, these are like kind of nice additions. I have Trayce Jackson-Davis there listed as Illinois. That should be Indiana, excuse me, on the graphic there. Trayce Jackson-Davis from Indiana. But nonetheless, he's a very, very nice big who can block shots, protect the rim, and also get out and run. He's kind of a different style big from what Sacramento currently has, which is why I like him as an option. Also a really good passer. Somebody who I think you could run some of the same offensive stuff that you currently do when Sabonis is out of the game, which is, I think, a nice little wrinkle. And then Noah Clowney can really rebound the ball, can step out behind the three-point line and knock it down a little bit. But he basically is priority number one, rebound the ball. And to be honest, in Game 7, that really hurt the Sacramento Kings. Again, that's a little bit of recency bias. I don't want to base everything off of one playoff series. But I do think that if you can get a backup big who can help you board and can knock down some perimeter shots, it's a huge win, especially in the 20s in the NBA draft. So transitioning here now to their free agency situation, where we're going to look at what this team currently has, how they could look to get better, and then guys that they have to potentially either keep or replace. There are projected $23.2 million in cap space, which might sound like a lot, but that number is going to shrink here depending on who they decide to keep. They also have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is going to be $12.2 million annually, which is something I think that they should strongly consider locking themselves into this year. First player I want to mention is Harrison Barnes, an unrestricted free agent this year. Started a vast majority of the games for the Kings this season. He was a really, really nice pickup for them back when they made the trade with the Dallas Mavericks. Only giving up Zach Randolph's contract and Justin Jackson, which is basically nothing out the door and a good player back in Harrison Barnes in the door. That's a big win in that trade for them. And I think his leadership, his been there, done that history, is a guy who had played in a lot of playoff games, and honestly for the Kings this postseason stepped up pretty big time for them in certain moments. Now I know he missed the game-winning shot the one time, and Game 7 was a little rough from Barnes, but still, I still think that there's a role on this team for him. I think Kings fans would love to have him back. I think Kings management would like to have him back as long as it's at the right price point. Another guy who I'm pretty confident, like 98% sure he'll be back in Kings purple next year, is Trey Lyles. I think he really liked the role that he found himself in this season. Again, kind of salvation for his career. And not only was it salvation for him getting some minutes and playtime, but he rewarded the Kings and he rewarded Mike Brown with some real strong consistency. And then other options that are also heading toward free agency: Len, Dellavedova, Terrence Davis, and Chimezie Metu all head to free agency. None of these guys are really like big impact players and guys that if they lose, it's like, oh no, what are they going to do? But it's, you know, guys who fill out your rotation, back end guys. Dellavedova, of course, kind of for that depth purpose, as a bench guy who's going to keep the chemistry and culture up. Metu, a young big, but they have Nemash Keita, who played for the Stockton Kings this year and was on the All-G League team. So I'm not really worried about Len or Metu. I think probably Keita does step up into that role, honestly, as one of the primary backup bigs. And then Terrence Davis, I mean, he shot decently well in Game 7, but again, I'm not really worried. If they let him go, it's not going to make or break their team. I think that there's other big questions about this team going into next year, and part of it is if they let all of these guys go, or most of them, they maybe just prioritize keeping Trey Lyles. They do go into the offseason with some cap space where they could maybe look to go out and target some guys. The number one option on the board for me is Kyle Kuzma for the Washington Wizards. They would have to use cap space likely to get a deal done there. Otherwise, it could potentially be a sign-in trade, which gets a little bit more complicated and a little bit more hairy when it comes to the reality of getting something like that done, because you need the other team. You would need Washington to help you facilitate something like that. And with the management change there in Washington, maybe it's a possibility, but I wouldn't bet on it. So because of that, if you're the Wizards here, and maybe if you don't facilitate a Kyle Kuzma trade, like, why would it still make sense for the Kings to make some moves to open up the money to sign Kuzma? One, I think he's a pretty decent fit onto their roster. He rebounds the ball fairly well for a wing. He also obviously can create shots for himself a little bit, which is one of those things I think that they need to look for. Now, the three-point shot making comes and goes a little bit with Kuz, but again, a fantastic rebounder who can push the ball in transition. He's really growing defensively into a pretty solid defender, and a guy that I would trust on the court at the end of games. The reason I have Kyle Kuzma here tied to the Sacramento Kings is because of the history of Monte McNair pursuing Kuzma via trade. Now remember, back before he got sent to the Washington Wizards in the Russell Westbrook deal by the Los Angeles Lakers negotiated by Rob Pelinka, at one point it was reported that the Kings and Lakers had actually significant traction on a deal sending Kuzma to the Sacramento Kings in a deal for Buddy Hield, which would have significantly shifted the landscape of the league. And obviously later on, Hield gets traded to Indiana, kind of facilitates the whole Sabonis trade, completely flips the script on what could have potentially happened in the NBA. But does a Kuzma to Sacramento move make sense now? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I think that the Kings are going to be one of the better teams with the ability to make a move for Kuzma this offseason. Kevin Love, Miami Heat forward, obviously got bought out by the Cavs this year, has had a really nice playoff stretch actually for Miami and kind of this bench role coming in, and takes a lot of charges. Obviously one of the better breakout passers the league has ever seen. Had some fantastic passes in Game 1 of this series against the New York Knicks. And I think you can get him on the partial mid-level exception. I'm talking, maybe $6.5 million annually. Remember, they have $12.2 million, and they can break that up into as many contracts as they want. Theoretically, Kevin Love could be half of that. At $6 to $6.6 million, would Kevin Love take a deal like that to join a contender, a team that maybe is going to be a contender? And would he want to return back to the state of California? Remember, he played his college ball at UCLA, so maybe a return to Sacramento would make some sense in terms of the geographic location as well. I'm sure he doesn't hate the Miami weather either, though. but I think he would really help them as kind of another pace and space big man, can help them run in transition with some of those breakout passes like I referenced. And then the other thing about him, he steps out behind the three-point line and knocks it down, plus his ability to slide in, take charges. This team doesn't protect the rim very well. I believe they ranked second to last or last in the NBA in blocks per game. And Love's not going to block a ton of shots, but he is going to slide in and take a bunch of charges, which at least puts a little bit of fear into the offense of, hey, if I'm driving the ball, I got to know where Love is at so that I just don't go barrel into him, pick up a charge, turn the ball over. Because honestly, charges are better than block shots because it's a guaranteed turnover, whereas a block shot still might land in the hands of the offensive team. So charges, way more effective, honestly, if you can get the call. And Kevin Love pretty often does. Torrey Craig, I think another guy that they could look to split that partial mid-level for. Now, would Craig want to leave the Phoenix Suns where he's finding a lot of success and they're on a very, very good team there with, 4 really good players around him? Probably not. So that's why you maybe have to overpay him a little bit. The Suns are probably going to offer him a minimum. The Kings probably offer him $4 or $5 million a year, and that probably gets him done, which is why if you split your partial mid-level between Love and Craig, you're adding 2 forwards into your room. And if you play them 10 minutes a game, it's not the end of the world, but they might in certain games be able to give you 20 to 25 minutes, which is really valuable. And I think would have helped the Kings a lot this past playoffs. Keita Bates-Diop, this is just my basketball nerd coming out here. Keita Bates-Diop probably does not move the needle very much, but for players who would be like really fun to watch in Sacramento, I think he kind of takes the cake here as a minimum level player. He's not going to make very much in free agency. I'm sure the Spurs would like to keep him if possible, but he's like a freakishly long athlete who just like makes some crazy plays sometimes. And there was always like this kind of like weird buzz and hope around him that he would grow into like this really, really great player. Never really happened. But I think in Sacramento is like, cutting out of the corner off of Sabonis high post ups and like just flying around, making some stuff happen on defense. He could actually find like a nice career for himself in Sacramento. Again, it probably doesn't even happen, but I would like low-key love to see that. That's like one of those like just basketball nerd out moments for me here when I was prepping for this video. I just kind of thought, what about Bates-Diop there landing in Sacramento? I kind of really like that. So who knows? Maybe they walk away with Kuzma, Love, Craig, and Bates-Diop in free agency, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, this team's got a lot of good forwards. I kind of like that. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, I mean, Keegan Murray's development is, I think, more important than any of these 4 players, honestly, for them. But I think these 4 players could in some way, shape, or form help their team to some extent, obviously varying extents depending on which ones they would actually target. So when it comes to trade targets, this is the part of the video that I would not rule out something big and crazy happening either. And it's OG Anunoby is really the headliner. I mentioned him in my Memphis Grizzlies offseason preview as well. And we're getting to the list of teams here that makes sense to go make a big splash trade like an OG Anunoby to help them out in certain series. And I think for the Kings, we saw it where at times, even though Andrew Wiggins hadn't really been playing a lot of basketball before coming back for that series, and he did look rusty at certain points, I just never really felt confident that the Kings had like a guy to truly match up with him. Now, again, I think Keegan Murray maybe grows into that a little bit, but having an OG Anunoby would have really, really helped. And yes, the price is going to be expensive for him. They're going to have to go talk with Atlanta, which it's a new GM there. So maybe the door's open to getting something done like that. But they're going to have to go talk to Landry Fields and say, look, I know that we have this draft pick, we traded you, and obviously it's a difficult discussion to have because, hey, look, we protected it, and now it's protected for like 4 years. You probably don't want to move off of that. Is there any way we can incentivize you to unprotect that pick so that we can trade future first? And that would open up the pathway for them to go trade for an OG Anunoby or one of the other players here, like a Cam Johnson, who they would have to trade for his restricted free agency rights, which doesn't happen very often. The last time something like that happened was Malcolm Brogdon when the Pacers traded for his rights from the Milwaukee Bucks. They did so in order to stop Milwaukee from potentially matching their offer sheet. Sacramento doesn't really even have the cap space to put themselves in a position to land Cam Johnson, in my opinion, that way. So they'd actually have to go out and try and acquire those restricted free agency rights, which is a little bit of a different rationale and reasoning as to why. But at the same time, I do think would be an intriguing get for them because he addresses some of their needs. A perimeter shot maker, I think defensively is pretty solid, not great, but solid. And then I also really like the idea of maybe buying low on a guy that I think the Orlando Magic are pretty close to just saying, we wanted it to work with him. We tried really hard. We've rehabbed him through a ton of injuries, but we just don't think it's ever going to happen. And that's Jonathan Isaac. His contract's kind of big, but if you can get him in, if you can find a way to fit him into your books, it's not like it's an outrageous contract. And Jonathan Isaac would be like such a fantastic addition for Sacramento because he would become, when healthy, their best perimeter one-on-one defender. He would also become their best help defender. And that type of hybrid versatility from a forward, it's pretty rare to find. There's only a few examples of that. I think Jaden McDaniels is a similar comp. I think that Taylor Hendricks coming into this year's draft is going to do some similar stuff to what Jonathan Isaac's going to do. And I realistically, I would love to see Isaac in purple because I think he would really change the complexion of this Kings team defensively and give Mike Brown a weapon that he just currently does not possess on that end of the floor, while also still being able to fit in offensively. And I think with, honestly, Sabonis's passing, Isaac would find himself scoring probably way easier than he ever has in his career before. Again, he has to stay healthy, and he hasn't done that. So is Sacramento willing to even explore trading for him? Probably not. But if you can get him at a very cheap price point where you think, look, this is worth that little gamble, I would strongly consider it, at least right now, because the Kings don't have a lot of trade flexibility. And if they can fit Isaac in somehow, some way that makes sense for their team building, I think he's a phenomenal fit onto the way that they actually play. So when we look at an early outlook for next season, I'm going to keep it a buck here, and I'm going to be very realistic about this. I'm not just going to say, oh, well, look, this team's going to win 55 games and they're going to be awesome. I do think the Kings in year 2 of Mike Brown, they might be set up for some early struggles and just some year 2 struggles in general. And this happens a lot of the time for second-year coaches and, team. Obviously, Mike Brown's coached for a long time, but second-year coaches in a specific location, some guys perform really well and then they leave in free agency. The roster turns over a little bit. You kind of have to figure out how to adjust on the fly because teams now have a whole year of scouting data on you and know what you're looking to do finally. Whereas like the first 40 games of the year, teams didn't really know what the Kings were trying to do because the Kings themselves were learning what they're trying to do. And because of that, teams are going to be better prepared to defend them next season, which we might see a little natural regression when it comes to their offensive numbers. Kevin Huerter might not shoot 42% from 3 again. Perhaps he will, but the team overall is going to still be good. And I think one big thing too, one area of regression, this was the healthiest team in the league. And I kind of feel bad for saying that because I know Sabonis played through a hand-thumb injury this year that was pretty severe and for a lot of players would have knocked them out. So there's your, quote unquote, they weren't actually healthy. But like they had guys in the lineup. There was no, torn ACL, torn Achilles, anything like that. And I don't want that for any of the players. But the realistic situation is that at some point, someone for the Kings is probably going to miss significant time. Someone important for the Kings, one of their key top 4, top 5 guys. And if that happens, it just does change the outlook of your team. I mean, think about even just Kawhi Leonard and Paul George missing the playoff series against the Clippers. They were competitive in that series against the Suns while losing in 5. They played in pretty much a close game every single game of that series. But the one game that Kawhi Leonard was actually fully healthy in game 1, they won. And the other 4 games they lost. And it's just kind of the way that NBA basketball is, that the margins are so thin between teams that missing one guy for 20 games of your season might push you from a team that goes 14-6 in those 20 games to maybe 9-11 or 10-10. And those 4 or 5 games, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but go look at the standings right now and see what separated the team that finished 3rd in the West in Sacramento and the team that finished 7th in the West in the Los Angeles Lakers. There's not really that massive of a gap in NBA basketball. And if the Kings aren't healthy, they might not be as good as they were this year. But at the same time, if they make some good moves this offseason, I could see them also taking a step forward. So I don't want to be this, worry wart that says, oh, the Kings are going to be terrible and this, that, and everything else is going to happen. It's going to, be nothing but rain and storm clouds all season long next year, because I don't think that's the reality either. I just think at some point there might be a little natural regression, and in some areas there might be some positive improvements because, again, there's more consistency, more continuity. Players are more comfortable playing with each other and understand how they play off of each other. And also, I think this postseason success, even though they lost in the first round, I think they found a lot of confidence through the way that they played. So they might come out as different beasts next year too. So I do think this Kings team is still going to be good. I think you could probably lock them up for a playoff spot, which would be awesome for Sacramento to have 2 years back-to-back of playoff success. It's just incredible. So Kings fans, I'm really happy for you. I hope you guys really did enjoy this video. Again, I'm not trying to be super negative. Huge thank you for watching and just taking time out of your day to tune into this Kings video. Make sure to check out my NBA mock draft on the channel that I posted today as well. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, turn on the notification bell if you haven't already, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.